Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we'll get started. My name is Janet Berg. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm the Executive Director of Neighborhood Partnerships. And I want to begin today by acknowledging the people whose land we are gathered on. The state of Oregon has been home to generations of people from many tribes. The Nez Perce, Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Northern Paiute, Warm Springs, Yahusan, Klamath, Wasco, Wishram, Takelma, Tanino, Malala, Clackamas, Umpqua, Tututni, Coos, Siuslaw, Kalapuya, Chafin, Yoncalla, Ulsi, Santiam, Siletz, Tillamook, Nestucca, Nehalem, Clatsop, Chinook, Clatskanie, Klickitat, Coquille, and others have made their homes here. Let us also acknowledge the robust Native community made up of members of more than 380 tribes that originate from around the country and whose journeys have brought them to Portland by way of forced displacement or seeking opportunities. We pay respect and thank the elders past and present of these Indigenous people. We give gratitude for and celebrate their rich histories. We acknowledge their enduring perseverance, resilience, and contributions across generations. And we acknowledge the need to work for justice for all that has been stolen from them. We also want to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter. Our society has, deeply rooted within it, centuries of white supremacy economies built on enslavement, the disproportionate imprisonment of Black folks, the violation of human and civil rights, and the concentration of extreme wealth into the hands of a small, mostly white, elite power structure. We explicitly name anti-Blackness as the root of most oppression and racism. We believe this will allow us to be better equipped to dismantle harmful structures and institutions that we're working with and within. Again, thank you all so much for being here with us today. We know that you have many demands on your time, and we're really pleased and honored that you've decided to spend time with us. This event today was first imagined before the COVID pandemic and before the events that George Floyd's death set in motion. Our goal was always to challenge ourselves and colleagues like all of you to imagine a new way of doing our work and of doing business, to think about and plan for a redistribution of power and resources so that communities of color are at the center of building racial and economic justice in Oregon. That reimagining and redistribution is even more imperative now, and our opportunities for change also feel much larger. We know that doing business in the same old way will produce the same inequitable outcomes and perpetuate racism and white supremacy. I think we all also have a glimpse of the potential and possibilities that are unleashed when economic justice work emerges from communities and when communities determine what success looks like and how it's measured. Today, we hope to get and share some examples of that potential, some ideas of practices that support economic justice, and most importantly, to begin a conversation among all of us about how we might be able to work together differently in the future. I would really like to stop and thank just for a minute all of the folks who have helped us plan and carry out this event. It's been a real pleasure having this team together. And now joining me in welcoming you today are Michelle DePass, President and CEO of Meyer Memorial Trust, Oscar Arana, Director of Community and Economic Development, NEA Family Center, and Annette Case with the Asset Funders Network. I'm going to turn it now to Michelle. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How are you? I'm Michelle DePass. I have the honor of being a fairly new Oregonian, and I've been here for 2 years. Honestly, this is hard. Sorry, Nancy.
I'm here with you.
You all invited me to open your gathering today. You didn't invite me to cry.
I'm okay too, though.
I hold you all for having this deeply important conversation and not giving up amongst everything that we are all grappling with. And we all are the lucky ones. We all have jobs and we all have health insurance. And yes, I've gotten stopped by a cop and been shaking. But nothing has happened to me or a member of my family like what has happened to our brothers and sisters that have been murdered recently. So we are all the lucky ones. So, you know, every once in a while I shed a tear, but this is the moment we have all been doing this work for. And, you know, 2 months ago when I wrote that op-ed in the Oregonian, you know, I urged us all to take advantage of systems that were being dismantled. And that was in the COVID era. That wasn't in the era of what we're in today, which is grappling with the dual pandemics of COVID and racism in very real ways. So I've shifted a bit in terms of thought, in terms of action, but it still is very much about tearing it down. I am so proud of the young people, the protesters who've said, you know what? To Gen Xers, that's what I am. Yeah, you didn't get it done. We're gonna get this done. And they have not wavered. And that's where we all have to be. We're all grappling with what this nation has been founded on. White supremacy, slavery. Like we weren't just a nation that had some slaves. We were founded on slavery. We were founded on, how could people of color have assets in this country? We were founded on the blood of indigenous peoples and taking their land. And I know that my liberation is dependent on me standing side by side with my indigenous brothers and sisters and their sovereignty. Mm-hmm. This nation was built on a system of white supremacy and a system of slavery, a system of blood, sweat, and tears. That's how the white elite has their assets. And being real about that history is a part of our salvation. Mm-hmm. It's just a part of our salvation. Early on in my career, I was at Ford Foundation and I was in the assets division. How ironic is that, right? This was, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it was a minute ago. And that division included workforce development, it included community development, but it also included environmental justice, which was my portfolio, because we were clear that assets are not just monetary. Assets are health, assets are safety, and I learned a lot there, but even so, it's not as real. It was not as real as where we are today. Our social contract has been completely broken, and we have to go from there to be able to build up the assets that we need. Since my early days of being at Ford Foundation, my first philanthropic gig, I've been grappling with the fact that the pools of wealth that I am privileged to be able to work in partnership with grantees, with communities, with the field, are a mere measurement of inequity, of racism, all of that caused that wealth. And so what are we going to do about it? I'm so privileged to be in a conversation with, I know that this network is a space for NGOs, a space for community, and a space for philanthropy. We need more spaces like this. So I'm just really glad to be in this space with you. I should probably end on something upbeat since I started out, Terry. You know, we're not just talking about safety nets here. We are talking about safety. And so what is amazing at this moment is you used to have the good guys and then all the rest. But right now, what I'm seeing is a little bit more of a few of the bad guys, and all the rest are like, okay, we have to get to these bad guys. And so that's how we build a new social contract. That's how we build community wealth. Yesterday, I was on a call with Sarah Kostelik from the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And Sarah said, you know, one of the issues that we have is that we are asking individuals and families to solve systemic issues. Mm-hmm. That can't go on. And I see this group as a real space to lift that up and to change that. It's the single mothers who lack retirement, lack benefits. It's the essential workers who've taken us through this pandemic that are part of this community and the wealth that we need to build. I'm really proud that Oregon stood up and said, undocumented workers are part of this community and we need to be able to help them protect whatever wealth they have, which is little. But we are all a part of community with them. So in closing, as I've thrown out all of the notes that I was going to talk about, the systems are being dismantled. We have a moment. I appreciate the space where we can all think about it together to be able to rebuild a system. I'm pretty sure that there are YouTubes with me saying, you know, I'm done with capitalism. Let's think about what our system is. Where capitalism is here to stay for a while. So we have to figure out what we're going to do to make it work for us. I appreciate being a part of the conversation. And I know next time I'll be able to be more encouraging because we're all gonna fix this, right? Thank you.
Oscar?
Good morning, everyone. And Thank you, Michelle, for grounding us with your words and just really speaking from your heart. Um, it's I've definitely shed a lot of tears as well, and I will be hoping to not will be hoping to get through my remarks here without breaking into tears as well. So and thank you, Janet, for opening the space with a land acknowledgement and recognizing that anti-Blackness is the root of most oppression and racism in our country right now. Good morning. My name is Oscar Arana. I've had the privilege of working at NEA for almost a decade now. I've learned many lessons throughout my experience, and I look forward to learning even more. One of those lessons is that many Native American tribes and indigenous people believe that the important decisions we make now will impact 7 future generations. This way of thinking is meant to make us consider others in the future and remove our own and immediate self-interest. This philosophy also believes that we're connected to those who came before us and those who will come after us, and it's our job to be a bridge between the past and the future. Unfortunately, we've inherited an unjust and racist past, and it is our responsibility to act now to redirect our present and create a better future. Institutional racism isn't new, and it's pervasive. We have been fighting racism and inequality for centuries, which is why organizations like NEA exist. Because if it wasn't for the leaders and founders who came before us, whose work we are moving forward, we wouldn't be here today sharing our stories, lifting our ancestors' voices, and demanding justice. And there certainly wouldn't be a movement in the streets right now holding law enforcement accountable to be better for our community and our children. We're in the midst of a pandemic that's affecting people's ability to breathe, a virus that's disproportionately affecting Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This pandemic will create a global recession that will also disproportionately impact BIPOC communities. The last recession we had led to one of the fastest and longest economic improvements in the country. Unfortunately, this economic prosperity never reached our communities and led to the largest wealth gap we've ever had. Native American households here in Multnomah County only experienced a 4% median income growth since 2009. So as we face another crisis, a financial one, people of color have not been set up to succeed. The response to the pandemic from the public and philanthropic sector has been pleasantly surprising. I've never seen grant and contract restrictions lifted so easily, reporting requirements waived, and resources being so quickly and intentionally deployed with minimal red tape. Moratoriums on residential and commercial evictions have been placed. Unemployment benefits have increased and extended. Taxpayers are receiving income for whatever they may need. We've created forgivable loans as long as they meet a larger community need. Well, it's unlikely we'll see something like this again soon. It would be a missed opportunity if we didn't embrace elements of the response permanently, as many people of color are experiencing crisis every day. Just like large corporations have been preparing and planning for situations like this one to extract profit and build individual wealth, the public and philanthropic sector can step in now to ensure we look towards the future and focus on building long-term community wealth. Let's take this opportunity and embrace bold and progressive strategies and truly create systems change. A few ways we can do this is by investing in capacity building, operational, and unrestricted grants to Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations, deploying capital in ways that allows those organizations to build advocacy and organizing power, providing ongoing patient mission-related investment into community-owned and community-controlled projects, and supporting the organizations who have already been holding unjust systems and corporations accountable. You're going to hear a few presentations today about organizations doing great community prosperity work. While you're listening to those presentations, think about how much they've accomplished with relatively new and small investments, and that they've had to work really hard to get. Think about what our present could look like if investments had actually started 50 or 100 years ago. The actions we take now will impact our present and future generations. Let's work together and create systems that not only allow Black, Indigenous, people of color the opportunity to breathe, but the opportunity to become self-determined and thrive. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Oscar. Annette?
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Michelle and Oscar, for breaking open this conversation and bringing your full selves and heart to it. I think I also am going to dispense with a lot of what I was planning to say. I'll start just by saying that I'm Annette Case, and I'm the Pacific Northwest Program Officer for the Asset Funders Network. And we are a national network of funders. We work with a national network of funders to support economic well-being. And specifically in the Northwest, we are really focused on the ways that we can prevent harm from how wealth has been generated and accumulated across the generations, and simultaneously extracting it from Indigenous people and communities of color, and how we can advance racial wealth equity. You know, we know that as Michelle and Oscar talked about, that the wealth and power of this country was really built on the land and labor and lives of Indigenous, Black, and Brown people. And I could say a lot about the policy choices that policymakers have made and practices that have been engaged in throughout our history to really intentionally and systemically extract wealth. And I might even go so far as to say it extracted wealth to create racial disparities and limit opportunities to live full and free lives. And how philanthropy, the wealth and philanthropy was built on that system, and really, replicated a lot of disparities. But as Oscar mentioned, there are lots of ways that we can, make new choices. As those were choices, we can and are making new choices. And I know that a lot of people here today are already deeply engaged in that work, and we're here to build on that work today. So I just, I take a lot of inspiration and hope from all the voices of people in the streets and what people are saying about where they want investments to go and how we can target those. And this shared table today of equal voice and power. And I really think, this is an opportunity to take a concrete, positive step forward in this moment and in this movement. So thank you all for being here and for the discussion we'll have and where we go from here. Thank you.
All right, I think that's me. And me is, good morning. I am Mary Lee. I use she or my name. I am Chinese American, and I work for Multnomah County in an organization called the MIL, the Multnomah Idea Lab in the Department of County Human Services. I want to join my voice in welcoming everyone to this engagement with each other. And before we get into further in the agenda, this is a practice that I am doing in every gathering that I am at, which is just to take a moment to be present and to be mindful. So I'm going to invite everyone, and again, this is an invitation, to soften your gaze, perhaps turn your video off if that's more comfortable for you, close your eyes, and together let's just take a couple of deep breaths. Thank you. And as you come back to this moment, I want to just say a few words about today and where we're going to go. I'm thrilled to be with you today in an action-oriented experience with each other. And I want to say that I hope everyone continues to follow the examples of our speakers who have welcomed us in showing up in however that looks like for you. I invite you to show up with all of your feelings that may be present: fear, sadness, rage, hope, all of them. I myself, people have been asking me, how are you? And I keep saying I'm on the verge of tears at any moment. So I want to say thank you for our opening speakers in showing up exactly how you are in this moment. And I want to invite all of us to honor yourself and your needs while we're together of course, here and now and in the beyond. And in particular, I want to say to Michelle, I see you and I'm here to be seen. So thank you for opening our time together. I'm going to be supporting us as we work together in moving the agenda forward. So I'm going to apologize in advance for any mistakes I may make, both either technological or in the process, right? And ask for your grace for those mistakes as I make them. I have the pleasure this morning, I'm going to get to introduce a lot of fabulous folks. And I was going to say a short bio about our speakers and presenters. However, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. You can look in the conference materials and there is bio information for all of our speakers. I encourage you to take a look at it. This is a phenomenal panel of folks. I want to start by introducing someone who is going to be our graphic recording artist, Anthony Weeks. If you haven't had the pleasure of working with a graphic recording artist, it really does enhance the quality of our work. And I wanted to say, Anthony, do you want to say hello this morning?
Sure, thank you, Mary. Yeah, you won't hear a lot more from me, but trust that I will be listening deeply to your conversation. What I do is as much a listening function as a visual function. So I'm going to be listening to your conversation and capturing it using text and color and graphics. And you'll see some of my work at the end of our meeting today, but then I think that shortly after this meeting, you'll see the rest of some of the work that I'm going to be doing to create the visual notes from our conversation today.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. I'm thrilled that you're here and we're looking forward to seeing what we look like. In addition to the visual recording, we'll also be making an audio recording of this session, and all participants will receive all of this documentation plus documentation from the chat box and from the breakout sessions, as well as the slide deck after today. So if that helps reassure folks that you can really just be in the moment, listen, fully engage, and know that the documentation will come to you afterwards. You don't need to be concentrating on notes unless that's the way you like to work. So we've got options for everyone. Now, to prepare for the breakout sessions that are going to happen in just a moment, I want to invite you to engage in a little visual activity, aka drawing yourselves. And oftentimes people say, well, why draw the response to a question? And the reason we ask you to draw is for similar reasons to why we've asked Anthony to work with us today. When we draw, we activate different parts of our brain. And activating different parts of our brain supports creativity, supports innovation. And the invitation that we received from our welcoming speakers to move towards action, move towards doing things not in the usual ways that we've done them, move towards thinking in different ways. We want to be able to stimulate that within your brain. Also, we as humans retain visual information at a much higher rate than solely the written word. So want to provoke that in our brains. And finally, we want to practice taking a little risk taking, right? This is a moment to take risks. If there was ever a moment for us to be taking risks. And again, this is a safe and easy way for us to do that. So I want to say this is not meant to be art. We are not meaning to match Anthony's skill set. It's not meant to be perfect. Please don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Just draw what comes to the top of your head. And the question is, what does wealth look like to you? What does wealth look like to you? Take a moment, reflect on the question. draw how whatever feels representative to you. And you will have a chance to share your drawing and introduce yourself when we go to our breakout sessions after the panel. All righty. Thank you for engaging in that exercise with us. And now we're going to move to the next part of our agenda, historical context, community perspective, and issue framing. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Andreas Lopez, Research Director for the Coalition of Communities of Color. And as I said before, I'm not going to do the bio in the interest of time, but Dr. Lopez will discuss the historical context and data inequities that exist in Oregon. Welcome, Andreas.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mary. Hi, I'm Andres Lopez. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Research Director at the Coalition of the Communities of Color, and I'm happy to be here with you all today. So I just wanted to begin with the first slide. So I guess next slide. Thank you. I just wanted to begin just by reverbing a lot of what we've already been talking about, right, is hearing these term of systems. That the systems that currently exist are built on racism, right? And that when we talk about systems, we're not simply talking about person-to-person interaction, right? But we're talking about a pattern network of relationships between individuals, groups, and institutions, right? And this pattern network of relationship evolves over time with its own culture, its own normalities, its own language, right? Its own structure. And those systems become very, very challenging to understand and to untangle because they become passed off as normal, as just the way things are or how things have always been, right? But as many of us know, these systems are built on racism. You think about families, or cities, or states, our education system, housing, and they're loaded with power and resources that are allocated differently to people and groups based on race. So that's one way I want us to think about racism and systems, right? That racism is about this disproportionate allocation of power and resources based on race, on these made up categories of racial categories, right? So I just wanted to begin with that and thinking about those systems, and then how we make sense of those systems, how we unpack them, and how data and community are part of solving all those pieces, right? To exposing what these systems are and providing solutions to change some of them. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just a map of Oregon. I just wanted to sort of provide a visual demonstration of the percentage of communities of color by county across the state. So you kind of see there in the top corner, Multnomah County and Washington County and Clackamas County, right? And then you see some of the other communities of color that live along the gorge there, and then Eastern Oregon here. You see some more representation there. This map says Oregon's population is 4.2 million. A lot of the work that I'm going to show and numbers I'm going to show today are based off of American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So that estimate for 2018 was 4 million. So you can already see the growth of Oregon's population in the last few years, right? But from that estimate, people of color made up about 26% of the state of Oregon's population. Next slide. So this, and again, these numbers are a little outdated, and you're going to see this pattern of misunderstanding around the numbers, and that's important to catch on too, because it is a problem, and I'm going to address that. But I do want to demonstrate to you all just sort of how these numbers have fluctuated, right? So you see These brighter blue boxes are white folks, and then you see other communities of color along the bottom. And as they grow from 1990 to 2010, and then soon enough we're going to have the 2020 data, which will be able to give us a better understanding of where we're at. But now, according to the estimates, roughly Black folks make up about 3% of Oregon's population. Indian and American natives make up, or Alaska natives, excuse me, make up about 3%. AAPI communities about 7%, and Latinx about 13% of any race. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. All right, so how did we get here was the real question. And when we were talking about this as a group, Walida and Marisha's work came up about Oregon's racist history, which is really powerful. There's some links there. If you haven't seen any of her work, or the way that she paints the picture and understanding of Oregon's racist history, you really should. It's very profound. But I just want to share a few points here. One, in 1787, when the Constitution was drafted, there was very particular language that really set our country on a very dangerous path, a racist path forward, right? And that was this establishment of the consent of the governed, and basically those in power, right? And that was speaking directly about propertied white men only. So what happened from the beginning of our Constitution was that our government, number one, gave priority to property over human rights, which we see a lot now. This is why a lot of white folks are outraged by destruction of property, right? That the real object of government is to control property, right? This is baked into what we are as a country and our ideas of our nation. And then we even see that now with some of the peaceful protesters downtown at the Justice Center, where the Portland police have set up fences right around the Justice Center to say, hey, this fence is a boundary and this is property. And if you touch it or you come past it, then we will enforce the law, right? So this idea of property, of priority to property over human rights is something that has always been a part of our history. Another thing that did is also secure the dominance of men and whiteness, right? This sort of cultural understanding of manifest destiny, that white folks were in charge, that their culture was superior, their understanding and ideals were needed, right, to rule this land. And of course, that's been America's history, a racist white man utopia, essentially. And in Oregon, it's the same thing. Oregon became a state in 1844. And what they did when they became a state is that they outlawed slavery and Black folks, right? They were both anti-slavery and anti-Black. And what that really shows is that they were saying, we don't want slavery because it messes with northern economies for us to industrialize, right? But then we also don't want Black folks because there's a false idea that Black folks are taking the jobs of poor white people or working class white people, right? So this is the principles of our state. It was a racist white utopia for white folks to sort of build a homeland. And here you see 1895 is this racial exclusionary law that wasn't removed until the Oregon Constitution until 2001, and actually still shows up. If you buy property in Washington County and you're Black, it still says that you're not allowed to own this land. And it does have information that says that that's been ratified, but it's still there. So if you're a new person who just moved to Washington County, a Black person who bought property, it's still on your deed, which I just learned this January, which is pretty wild. But I wanted to bring up this to attention because Oregon and our country are very similar, right? And in fact, Oregon was even more blatant about its racism and about its whiteness, which is why so few Black folks in particular live in this state. And it's really just to point out that all of our institutions are rooted in these legacies, right? In the containment and exploitation and exclusion of people of color. And so, not to get too depressing about all this, there's some good pieces, because people of color are resilient and find strategies to overcome inequalities. And so that's a lot of what we're here to talk about today. But we are climbing up and up. We are walking up and uphill, right? There's a steep grade of institutions, of racism, of power, of history that's against us, which makes it very challenging. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk briefly here, sort of to recap this idea of how we think about systems and racism, right? Oftentimes, most folks, particularly a lot of white folks, thinks of racism just individually, right? That this is about me, and that I'm not this way, and I don't treat people this way. But it's not, right? It is about the individual. That's definitely part of it, but it's also part of the interpersonal, how that affects your friendships, your sexual partners, your colleagues, right? It's also about institutions, the places that we work, the places that we live, the places where that we want to build civically, right? And then this is all part of a larger structure that isn't just about right here, right now, but that precedes us from histories and generations of systems and power reproducing themselves, right? So all sort of these things come together to create this racist storm that we're all in. And in many ways, right, white supremacy works towards maintaining this imbalance of power by hiding the truth, right? By making it covert, by making it seem as if it's not about race. And we can all probably provide many examples of how that exists. And I think as people of color, particularly led by indigenous values, we really have start to think more about how we decolonize our thinking, decolonizing our ways of being, the ways that we perpetuate hierarchies ourselves, the infighting within communities of color, right? All these things are part of this system. It's built that way for us to turn against each other. So I really want to center indigenous strategies for us to decolonize our ways of thinking and action, to really expose these toxic ways and also reimagine new ways for us to move forward. Next slide. So I just wanted to share some of the COVID-19 disparities so you have some understanding. And I'm happy to share some of these later with y'all. This is public here on the regional COVID-19 data dashboard. There's a link there for you. And then you have, you see here the population totals and then the percentages. And then next to that, you see that again for COVID cases, COVID deaths, and COVID hospitalizations. And this is just for Multnomah County. Right, and these numbers are based again off of those 5-year population estimates. So here we see that Latinx folks are 2 times as likely to contract COVID-19, that Pacific Islanders are 4 times as likely to contract COVID-19, and that BIPOC communities make up almost half of all COVID cases and are almost 2 times more likely to contract COVID-19. So the numbers are pretty staggering when you start looking at the disproportionality in each group, and I'd love to spend more time on it, but we don't. So we'll go to the next slide. I also wanted to share what this looks like on the state level. And again, these numbers are a little outdated because they're based off these estimates. But here we see that that white folks only make up 49% of the cases, and that's important. Latinx people are more than 2 times as likely to contract COVID-19, and BIPOC disproportionately is at 16%, and 18% if you include the +1 race and the other category. So you can kind of see here the population, the percentages, and then this is just for the cases, and you can see how much we're missing. We're missing 42% are BIPOC totals. We're missing 44% of BIPOC totals +1 race, and 74% if we included plus race and others. So, you know, you add just a few deaths, a few infections to any of these categories of our communities, the disproportionality soars. So we don't actually have the data to even demonstrate the extent on a state level what disproportionalities exist. Okay, next slide, please. So what's missing from the narrative? One of the things that I've really committed myself to in my role at the CCC is to make a call for all the missing data in Oregon on communities of color. What we need is disaggregated data from local, regional, and state governments and nonprofits. We need agreements with these folks. We need to understand how they collect these data, and we need to hold them accountable to reporting it out, which the CCC is working on. The other part of that is also centering community stories and knowledge, which works to decenter the disparity frameworks, right? We spend so much time talking about disparities, but our communities are really more about our resilience, are really more about our everyday survival. It's really more about our dreams and hopes and aspirations and the ways in which we collaborate and work together to achieve those things. So when we center community stories and knowledge, then the focus becomes more about changing our situation and more about what we imagine a better situation to be, not this the sort of way in which we paint people of color as people who need saving and need help because of how hard their lives are, right? Which is part of the system. So I only have a few more minutes here, but go ahead, next slide. I did just want to briefly talk about this number. Approximately 8% of foundation dollars are allocated to communities of color, and this is across the country. When we look at locally, the CCC did a report in 2008 that we found that foundations awarded just 9.6%, so about 10% of grants that have reached people of color across the state of Oregon. For Latinos, it was about 2%. For Native Americans, it was only 0.7%. For African Americans, it was 0.5%. And for AAPI communities, we see 0.1% of foundation grants. So this is pretty dramatic when you start thinking about what opportunities we have to move forward, and how many dollars could actually go to community-driven strategies, right? It's pretty limited. So for my last slide, I have 15 minutes, I'm almost there. For my last slide here, I just wanted to regroup and talk about ground up resistance and change, right? I talked about some of these needs, which is disaggregated data and community-centered strategies. But really, I think of collective action as being so important, and this is a big part of empowerment economics, which we'll talk about later today. But not just thinking about a few of the dominant actors. As CCC, we represent a lot of communities of color, but there's a lot of other communities of color who are not represented by our organizations. So we need a larger collective action that includes community leaders and groups, grassroots organizations, and other nonprofits and other coalitions, right, where we can bring all of our ideas together. We also need to put pressure on and partner with local, regional, and state governments. I've had some really great success putting pressure on OHA about collecting Real D data, which is race, ethnicity, language, and disability data, and they've been wonderful partners. I don't know if you all saw an article about me on OPB this weekend, but I called out the racism of the Key to Open Oregon study, and OHSU is now scrapping the whole study and working with us to center communities of color and communities of color-driven strategies. So this is possible. It just requires a concerted effort, and I think this is the time to strike. So that's it for me. Thank you all. I welcome any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andres. Wonderful overview, and amazing that you did it in 15 minutes. So I'll give you a thumbs up for all of that. I am going to invite folks, in the interest of time and for all of us to hear all the speakers, to put your questions into the chat. Two reasons. One is it'll allow us to keep flowing, and also it'll allow us to be able to work with our presenters after this session to get responses to your questions and put them out. So arguably it'll be a better strategy to get your questions answered. And of course, the contact information for all of our speakers is in the materials, and I know everyone would be happy to follow up with anyone who reached out. So thank you again, Andreas, for kicking us off. And next I want to introduce a dear colleague, Jayraj Singh, who is the Community Outreach Manager for APANO, Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And Jayraj is going to talk about some of the work that APANO is engaged in within API communities. Jayraj?
Great, thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jayraj Singh. I use he, they pronouns. I identify as South Asian American, and I'm the Community Outreach Manager at APANO. Thank you for being here today. So APANO, Communities United Fund, and APANO are two separate entities that are affiliated to promote a broad range of work. APANO became an independent 501c3 in 2010 after decades of organizing API families who were ignored, misunderstood, and lacked culturally responsive direct services. Leaders united in order to articulate a shared vision for systemic change. And APANO became a place where communities could think and act strategically to create policies that better serve our communities and achieve social justice. In March of 2017, APANO became a 501c4, allowing the organization to become involved in electoral organizing for political candidates at the state and local level, which includes city, county, and school board. This 501c4 designation also allowed for expanded capacity for local and statewide ballot measure organizing and policy lobbying, two aspects of advocacy which Apano had previously engaged. So some of the programs include community organizing, which includes leadership development through our Climate, Health, and Housing Institute, also known as CHI, the Asian Leaders for the Liberation of Youth, ALLY, and working with Chinese parents in Southeast Portland neighborhoods and outreaching to Vietnamese parents. Apano also believes that telling our stories, speaking truths, imagining alternatives, and shifting social narratives matters as a strategy for cultural change. The Cultural Work Program is working to create a vibrant space where artists and communities are shifting perception and re-envisioning an equitable world through the tool of creative expression. AMP, or Arts and Media Project, is a group of Asian and Pacific Islander artists and creatives that use art to advance social justice. As part of the cultural event series, the East Portland Arts and Literary Festival, also known as EPALF, is a large-scale, immersive, and multidisciplinary creative event led by and featuring artists of color. So our 501c4 focuses on, among other things, political endorsements, field organizing, which includes things like canvassing, phone banking, text banking, and lobby day. Our community development work has traditionally been focused on place-based anti-gentrification work, which includes small business development and support, affordable housing, transportation justice, and the J District night market. Next slide, please. So one of the fundamental questions we asked before convening this space was, what is power? How does Apano build collective power? So based on decades of community organizing practices, one of the definitions of power is organizing people, organizing money, and the ability to control, create, and prevent change. So Apano organizes people through narrative-based community organizing with digital tools such as social media and customer relationship management technology, or CRM. Our office space and event space provide a critical platform and forum to bring our communities together, to politicize them, share, amplify, and celebrate our stories and experiences. So we organize money through rental income via our event space as well as our office space. Individual contributions range from 1% to 3% of our revenue stream. Government contracts and nonprofit grants make up the majority of our revenue in our 501c3, whereas our 501c4 is comprised of individual contributions at 9% and grants at 91%. So we create change mainly through our political advocacy, cultural work, and leadership development. This is just one definition and illustration of power, but it gives you an idea on our fundamental needs to achieve our mission, vision, and values as an organization. Next slide. So Apano's Community Development Program is an emerging vehicle for sustainable community development and resistance to gentrification. We center the power, voices, and issues of residents and small business owners who are culturally specific, immigrants, and or limited English proficient who are property cost burdened or at high risk of displacement due to neighborhood changes. To achieve our goals, we work in 3 ways to resource, support our neighbors, build collective power, shift culture, and change policy to ensure our communities can thrive. We serve as a hub to anchor in the community in place, connecting residents and business owners to key resources that promote healthy environments, economic justice, and community safety. We agitate and organize our neighbors who are struggling to stay in the neighborhood, enabling them to connect their lived experiences with real opportunities to make change. We bring together the power of our neighbors with partners across the city to advocate for the investments, protections, and policies we need. Next slide, please. So one of the capstone projects led by our community development program was the development of the Orchards of 82nd. O82, as Apano calls it, is a mixed-use development that attempts to mitigate displacement by providing 48 units of transit-accessible, affordable rental housing. The name is Orchards of 82nd because prior to World War II, many Asian American families owned orchards and farm space in the Montevilla area. Tragically, the Japanese internment during the war resulted in these families losing their land and assets. Apano led a community visioning process that informed regional government Metro's decision to purchase the orchards of 82nd site for the purpose of developing transit-oriented housing and a community gathering space. So you can see the pictures here of the orchards of 82nd, and it used to be a furniture store. So the housing sponsor was Rose Community Development Corporation, who brought extensive development experience and access to specialized funds such as low-income housing tax credit equity. Apano helped raise over $1 million in donations. The construction cost was $12 million, and it took about 1.5 years to complete. Our funding sources included Community Development Block Grant, CDBG funds, Metro Transit-Oriented Development Funds, low-income tax credit equity, property-based Section 8 vouchers, sponsor funds, Oregon General Housing Account Program funds, construction and permanent loans. So this project really emerged from our 6 months community engagement visioning process in 2014, where we held charrettes and focus groups in multiple languages within the Jade District. This approach really helped us tailor the needs of the community and advocate for a community center, more affordable housing, a night market, and small business support. Our hope is to really continue this process of deep, place-based community engagement and development. Thank you, and I can take it, any questions maybe after, but or in the chat. But if not, if we don't have any time right now, I'll pass it to Sky or Mary.
Thank you so much, Jay Raj. And
Yeah.
again, I want to give a shout out to that background too that that you've got that you're rocking there. Again, folks, if you have questions or comments that you want to share with Jay Raj, please use the chat. He can respond to them in time, and we can also make sure that we get the responses to you after the session. Thank you very much. Next, we have Sky Waters, who is the Community Prosperity Manager for NAYA, Native American Youth and Family Association. And I'm thrilled to welcome Sky to the conversation. Sky.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sky Waters. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation, and I'm the Community Development Manager for the Native American Youth and Family Center, and NAYA for short. NAYA was founded by NAYA was founded by parent and garden and elder volunteers in 1974, really to give Native American youth a place to engage in sports and recreation. Over the last 4 decades, NAYA has evolved into an organization that employs more than 120 staff members and impacts the lives of over 10,000 individuals from over 380 tribal backgrounds annually. NAYA's 4 core areas of work are our family services, the Many Nations Academy, which is an alternative high school that serves Native youth, our youth and education services, and our community development work. Our community development really focuses on 3 areas: stabilization, prosperity, and advocacy. And to the side there, I listed out a lot of our programs within each of those focus areas. We really like to approach our work in a holistic and really a wraparound viewpoint, really allowing people to come into any one of these different program areas and really moving them through a number of different touch points. You know, we don't want to just serve someone, a small business. We really want to take that holistic look and have that provide them with housing and stability there, and then also provide them opportunities to advocate. And for our community development department, we really were grappling with a large community problem. You know, the fact that Portland is no longer affordable for the average Native American family. This creates a bunch of different issues. As families are getting moved further east, they're getting moved further away from transit, jobs, and opportunity. And it's also harder for them to access NAIA's services. Next slide. So really our solution was to bring our community closer to NAIA and closer to the Cully neighborhood, which I have kind of put up here on a map. And you can kind of see the downtown and Willamette River, and then to the north, the Columbia River. NAIA has been located in the Cully neighborhood since 2006 and has owned our offices since 2009. And our campus is located on a former Chinook fishing village named near Chokiku. And this space has really become a community asset for Portland's Native American community to gather, practice tradition, and teach culture in a safe and inviting space. So to bring back our community members, we are currently slated to have 3 projects in Cully, bringing 170 units of affordable housing. Each project is named in the Chinook language to honor the Native tribe in this area. We have Nasaika Ilahi, which was just completed early 2020. Mamuk Tokati and Hayu Tiliksum. And for Nasaika and Mamuk Tukati, we were able to partner with the Siletz tribe to create tribal preferences within each of those properties. So that is one of the first times that's been done outside of a reservation area. That was made possible by using their Indian Housing Block Grant dollars. And these tribal preference units are at 30% household income. So we really are not rent burdening our community members, and they can really start moving forward and building assets and prosperity. But we also realize that housing is just not the end of the solution, and really wanting to drive that holistic approach. We are moving more into, and here's just like for a visual of where NAIA is in reference to all 3 of those housing developments. And we're really wanting to bring in our community members and provide affordable housing, and then also provide wealth building opportunities and services. And we're doing that through the Cully Boulevard Alliance and our 42nd Avenue. They are neighborhood prosperity initiatives supported by Prosper Portland. These are really community-led organizations, and the decisions are made at the local level. It was really inspiring to see the COVID response within each of these organizations. The CBA was able to deploy $100,000 to 22 businesses. And our 42nd was able to carve out about $40,000 in its budget to provide rent relief for its tenants. And our last piece to this work is really trying to unlock more resources and assets. A lot of our organizations that we worked with within Cully kind of came to this realization that we're not short on ideas, we're short on funds. So we all kind of came together, and with support from Prosper and also Metro, we are moving forward the idea of a community-led TIF district, which is just tax increment financing, similar to the CBA and our 42nd model, and really unlocking and being able to do it a different way, where the TIF previously has led to displacement and gentrification. We would like to be more anti-displacement and focus on low-income communities and communities of color. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sky. Again, I want to remind folks that you can pose questions for Sky or any of our panelists in the chat. People will try to respond on the fly, as well as we will make sure after the fact that we get responses and everyone gets a chance to see them. So thanks again, Sky. It was wonderful. Our last panelist is Dr. Jessica Santos. She is the director for the Institute on Assets and Social Policy at Brandeis University. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here. And I just want to say I'm here representing 1/3 of a 3-way organizational partnership with Hawaiian Community Assets and the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, or National Capacity. And so together, the 3 of our organizations have been working for about 4 years to identify, name, develop, and share this idea of empowerment economics. And so I'm really honored to be able to, in our role as a research partner, engage with all of you today, advocates and funders from around the country in different communities, and to really learn about the place-based and specific approaches that you are all taking to advance both wealth and power, building both simultaneously, as well as, simultaneous economic and racial justice. So I think I'll start similarly to where we all start today, and kind of reinforcing a lot of what has already been said by Michelle and Andres about our history, Annette as well, about sort of the way wealth has been generated in this country. Just knowing that the family net worth, as one indicator of disparities in this country, the incredible vast and long-standing injustice that is the racial wealth gap is just one way of seeing kind of everything that we've all been talking about today. So I think about a couple of key points to start with that will then frame what's really the good part of this call, I think, which is the discussion. So the key parts of empowerment economics that we believe come from our knowledge of how history has developed such an incredible and persistent long-standing gap in resources and wealth in this country. One is that racial and economic justice are linked. You cannot achieve one without the other because of the way that our country was built on racism. Two is that the disparities we see today, this racial wealth gap, the COVID disparities that Andres shared, whether they're national, local, are exactly what we should expect to see based on the way our country is designed, based on the way our systems are set up. And so if we see people in the streets, if we're out in the streets in the last couple of weeks, demonstrating, protesting, giving voice to what we all inherently know are these vast injustices, it is a moment. Michelle, I agree with you. It is both this incredible movement moment and and sort of finally a collective moment of consciousness of what we all know to be true. And so we see these disparities in housing, we see them in education, we see them in work, we see them in financial, family finances, we see them in health, of course, right? And so the only thing I would add to the discussion that we've been having today about racial and economic justice is the flip side of what Sky was describing, right? Sky, your approach being holistic, it's so appropriate and, and organic and inherently true to the way we all live, and the fact that these disparities are intersectoral and linked, right? And so the good side of that story is if you pull on one thread or one lever, it's going to affect all of the others. And if we look at the next slide, last point about sort of setting the stage, again, the history, we've built this, we can tear it down. On this particular slide, I highly recommend checking out Solana Rice's organization, Liberation in a Generation. She just developed a new video on the racial wealth gap. These are some blocks to wealth building that we can see historically in our nation. We have the Indian land thefts, we have slavery, Jim Crow laws, the FHA redlining, we have the Japanese internment, everything that's been mentioned today. But every community, every racial and ethnic community, and every place-based community can develop their own specific understanding of what we call kind of a community asset story, both the blocks to wealth building as well as the alternate side, which again, Andreas and others have also mentioned, which is the stuff that has been erased from our collective national knowledge base and consciousness, which are the stories of resistance, innovation, development. And that is where we start with empowerment economics. Empowerment economics starts with recognizing the inherent wealth and the inherent assets in communities, that they are not just financial, that they're all linked. Right? And so the origins of empowerment economics come from Hawaiian Community Assets, a Native Hawaiian-led organization that developed a multi-generational and culturally relevant approach to building wealth and power. And, we say here that empowerment economics is developed by and for low-income API communities and other communities of color. There is an asterisk because, as I'll explain, we have some collective work to do with other organizations around the country to really see the extent to which or how this framework resonates with work that has been happening in communities for generations or not. But what we see are common threads. Empowerment economics looks different in Hawaii and for Hawaiian community assets than it does for the Hana Center, which is our second partnership case study that we developed, where youth after school gathered, immigrant youth, multi-ethnic youth gathered in a Korean organization, learned Korean drumming, and then also learned community organizing techniques, and were able to develop campaigns of their own to advance their own causes in Chicago. So the threads that we're pulling through this work collectively come from, the indigenous origins of this approach, but then are also built out through a kind of network and movement of small community-based organizations led by people of color, and that are collectively building a model for a new way forward. And so empowerment economics is definitely forward facing. It is aspirational, and it is also based in practice. It is community centered, ground up. And as we worked together through the National Capacity Network of members, we worked with over a dozen organizations to identify these common threads. We developed an initial, basically an evaluation framework to look at what happens when community development work is community-centered led. What's the result? And so if you go to the next slide. What we did was we started with Hawaiian community assets. We developed this case study where we learned about the housing stability work that Hawaiian community assets does. They developed a culturally rooted curriculum for financial capability, worked with families, and then also offered a bunch of products. So it's not just about individuals and families becoming educated or learning how to save, right? That's not the solution to the gap we saw. That's not what we're going for. We're going for actual complementary work in systems and policies. And so HCA does advocacy, and they developed and offer their own housing, like loan modification products, et cetera. They prevented foreclosures in the Native Hawaiian community, got people into Hawaiian housing, et cetera. So, and then we worked again with a set of a dozen organizations to figure out what are the shared themes. And then we went in depth with the Hana Center in Chicago. And so moving forward, our collective work is in really refining and understanding the shared threads of this joint building wealth and power, joint economic and racial justice work across the country in place-based situations led by communities of color. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the metrics that we developed as part of this evaluation framework. And speaking to funders specifically, I really appreciate being able to talk to funders all around the country about how this work can be supportive in its real, at its core. Empowerment economics is about, recognizing that our system is structured to maintain white supremacy, starting the conversation at moving forward based on community assets, and honestly, everyone else getting out of the way and supporting the work that's being led by communities. And so what does it look like to evaluate? What does it look like to fund such complex, holistic, intersectoral and often intersectional work in a place-based setting? We saw incredible outcomes in Hawaii, in Chicago, and even just today listening to Apano and Naya, you hear the differences between what it's like to practice and appreciate the value that empowerment economics oriented work brings to a community versus the sort of standard narrative-driven metrics around meritocracy. How many people learned how to save? How many bank accounts were open? How many housing counseling sessions were held, right? In empowerment economics, we're talking about to what extent have multi-generational connections been strengthened in families and in communities? So how are cultural values being like both preserved or adapted and innovated into the future in communities? How are people learning to develop new narratives that resist the shame, kind of blame way of looking at poverty from an individualistic versus a structural perspective, et cetera? And finally, just pointing out that all of these 6 impact domains occur on multiple levels. So this is a multi-level framework, a multi-level idea. It's affecting individuals, families, communities, and systems. And finally, I'll just end. I wanted to just frame up this, kind of in the event that it is helpful for all of you as you work together moving forward to advance economic and racial justice. Empowerment economics is a framework, it's a tool, and it really, I think if there's one takeaway from today, it is one way to look at centering communities in our work going forward to a much more dramatic degree than we've seen before. And so I'll end with this quote specifically about the kind of flow of resources and power within philanthropy, which I hope we can continue to discuss as it relates to Oregon. And this is from one of the members of National Capacity that's in this Empowerment Economics Network. So Native communities, even other ethnic communities, have an understanding that assets are more than financial. They are our relationships with each other, relationships with the place, relationships to culture. All these things are assets that are hard to quantify. we feel our role is to really remind people that conceptions of wealth and assets need to be broadened, and that funders can't get so locked onto certain metrics at the expense of these other harder to track metrics. So I want to thank everyone for inviting us into this conversation, and I look forward to engaging further, hopefully in person in the future at some point.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Please, if everyone will join me in thanking our panel of presenters. That was amazing, amazing work, and really a privilege to be able to hear what's happening both at the systems level, but also on the ground in our place-based strategies. Very much appreciate all of that. And now it's time for you to share your wisdom and learning with each other. So as we move into our breakout groups, I wonder if we can't take a moment to enjoy a flash look from Anthony of what you've been working on so far. Anthony?
I won't be able to yet, so I'll show you at the conclusion of our meeting today.
Perfect. Okay. Alrighty. So we're going to move into our breakout groups. So everyone has been placed into a breakout group. And for about the next 20 minutes, you're going to have an opportunity to introduce yourself. And I'll talk a little bit about how we want to ask you to do that. And then engage in a discussion. There are a number of questions in the chat that folks can use as inspiration or provocation, whichever feels right for you in this moment. I might encourage you to consider, again, on this theme of structural action, to think about the question about how can we engage and invite funders of all sorts, governmental, philanthropic, private, et cetera, to invest in co-creation of wealth and assets with BIPOC communities. But there are a number of prompts, and if none of those speak to your group, feel free to speak to anything else. What we want to ask you to do is introduce yourself with your name, the pronouns that you use, your race and ethnicity, and then share your picture of wealth. All right? There are facilitators in every one of your groups who will help you get through this. And again, questions can be shared in the chat box, and we will either try to answer them on the fly, or we'll make sure we get responses to them for all of our, if you want to direct your question to a panelist, we will get those responses put together and sent out after the session. And so with that, I'm going to invite everyone to go into their breakout rooms. And Emily, do we need to do anything special for that to happen?
No, you should have the invitation coming now.
Okay. All right, I'm going to invite everyone to go into their breakout rooms, and facilitators, feel free to begin your engagement with the group. Thank you. Hey, Chi.
Itzel, I missed. What were you saying? Sorry about that.
I was saying hello to Chi.
Will you share or notes?
Itzel.
I didn't take notes.
Oh yeah,
hi,
I will.
Mary. Hi, Mary.
Yes, I'll share the notes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right on. It looks like we're coming back.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing the notes for us.
No worries.
Thanks.
Hello, we're just waiting for folks to come back out of the breakout. Okay. Right on. Well, it looks like most of us are back from the breakout. Thank you. I hope the discussion was rich and powerful, and I look forward to hearing and seeing some of the notes. I'm wondering if we can just take a few moments at this point, and at the risk of dating myself, I'm going to ask for people to share something that made you go, and why. So a couple of folks, and if you want to just either raise your hand or unmute yourself, I'll call on folks, but something from your discussion that made you go, Aldo.
Yes. Actually, I was just writing to Andres. I heard the concept of power sharing, and I want to learn a lot more of that because the short explanation that I understood, I was like, oh, shoot, that makes sense. So I want to definitely explore that a lot more. And so I was actually messaging Andres.
And I was doing it at the same time as well. So
yeah.
I second that, Aldo.
Yeah,
we got cut off just right.
Yeah.
Cool. So a number of folks really interested in exploring this idea of power sharing and what that might look like on the ground and also in our organizing. Andreas, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, we were Brendan was talking about working at Umpqua Bank and sort of white leadership, right? I think that's a lot of my white friends now have talked about some of the challenges they've had with talking with their leadership. And until I worked for a coalition of communities of color with all people of color, I didn't realize how much white leadership was oppressive to sharing power, right?
Yes.
There was this hierarchy of these are how things are going to go, these are ideas. We'll listen, but we're not really actually going to shift our decision making, right? So when I think of power sharing, it's a way of helping to reframe that by saying, like, you don't have the answers and the solutions, because whiteness fundamentally is about being correct and establishing what is correct and proper, right? So
Yes.
that's a really hard thing for people to understand, especially those in power. But so thinking of how do we share some of that power by letting other people's decisions and ideas lead is really the concept of it.
Right on. Thank you. I have had a number of conversations with folks where I've said, look, the biggest challenge we have as BIPOC activists is our white friends and their white fragility when confronted with white supremacy culture and their place and participation in it. And if we could address that, I think we could move our work forward in some very phenomenal ways. But oftentimes it's our white friends and their fragility who are the biggest challenge to making the kind of change we want to see. How about another question, something that made you go,
Not to put my group in on the spot, but I thought one of the things I heard that has been running in my own head as well is Maura Bowman, she called us out, and I think it was speaking about sort of the power and privilege that white folks already have and the institutions where we are and the power and privilege that we tend to have, is thinking more deeply about what is the work that we can do in the spaces that we already occupy, as opposed to thinking, how do I go help that community differently?
Thank you. Any one of our panelists want to add to that or follow up on that, follow on? Jay Raj.
I'm sorry, I was writing notes. What was the question?
Oh, the question was just a reflection on how is it that we can do our own work within our own organizations and our own community without having this sense of I'm here to help someone else, or I'm reaching out to help someone else, that our own work is here for us, with us, by us, for us, as opposed to seeking out other people to help. Is that a good paraphrase?
Yeah, that works. Yeah, I mean, I think it's about base building. You know, for me right now, I'm base building in Washington County, really doing listening circles, one-on-one interviews, focus groups with folks, and building that trust within a new area of work that we're getting into in community development work. So I think it takes time. I think building those relationships are super important because you know, we at Apana, we get support in different ways more than financial, you know. It's more of a solidarity economy that we're aiming towards, and sort of an economy based on cooperation rather than competition and putting like people over profit. So I think that's a long-term goal, and it takes time to develop those type of relationships and build trust.
Right on. Thank you for the reminder about base building, right? So, so important. And this sense of, yes, there is an urgency here. And in many ways, I experience is a false urgency, right? Like we don't have time to think about this. We don't have time to build the relationships. We've got to, you know, do something. And in many ways, that false sense of urgency supports white supremacy culture, right? Because that's when we default to what is currently now, it's white supremacy culture. So thank you for that reminder about base building. I know there are a lot of other things that made us all go, I want to encourage you to either get them into the chat or make sure that your facilitator has them, because we will compile all of this. And again, as I said, we'll be working on putting responses together for folks after this session. And now I'd like to turn it over to Anthony to show us some of the I saw some of the slides just now. So let's take a look at some of Anthony's work. Anthony?
Hi. I've just been listening throughout the conversation today, and I do call myself a graphic facilitator, and I think the graphics are important, but I think that today I really wanted to go for the words and to get the words right, because I think that what you had to say was extremely powerful and important. And so I think that you'll notice that it's text heavy, but also I just wanted to be authentic to what you had to say. So in these different slides that I created, I wanted to honor not only the speaker, but also the direct quotations, as well as some of the main ideas. And then also, when you look at them as a collection, you'll see that there is, you know, definitely a common color scheme and style guide, but each different slide has its own areas of emphasis and different things that the speakers brought into the conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. I have worked with a graphic facilitator before, and I know just how much skill there is in terms of listening and then representation. So thank you so much. These look amazing, and I look forward to seeing the finished project. And everyone will get a copy of that. So thank you, Anthony. Big shout out for that work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And in our final moments, I would like to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Carlos Garcia, who is the Director of Economic Opportunity for Neighborhood Partnerships here in Oregon. And Carlos will take us through to the end. Thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I look forward to more conversations. And it's yours, Carlos, to send us home.
Thanks, Mary. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for today's conversation. It's been really grounding and powerful. Like Mary said, I'm Carlos Garcia. I'm the Director of Economic Opportunity at Neighborhood Partnerships. And I just feel very privileged to be here with you all today, albeit remotely. I just want to take a quick moment to thank all of our speakers for sharing their wisdom, knowledge, and yeah, I just felt really grounded having those conversations and included in the breakout. As we grapple with COVID claiming lives and decimating livelihoods, advocates for racial and economic justice find ourselves in the midst of an even greater horror. Yet another set of killings of Black people at the hands of law enforcement has brought the white supremacy at the root of our society into stark relief. And with it, sent courageous activists into the street. It's incredible to see that we're coming together from cities to suburbs to towns to demand the end to police brutality, so that our communities are safe for everyone, and so that resources we pitch in for together create schools, services, and the care that we all need. No matter what we look like or where we come from, we all want to know that we can make it home to our families at the end of the day. I want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work, organizing, sacrifice, and leadership happening in communities, and in many of your organizations at this time. One of the key things I want to just continue to say is the fact that we can't return to the way things were. Like folks have said throughout the day, throughout the presentation, there's no going back to normal. We must insist and create a different future. We need a future and system that values life over treasure, that guarantees all people can be with their loved ones, earn a living wage, with no exception, no matter where we work and regardless of whether we're white, black, or brown. We're strongest when we all have a fair chance at achieving our full potential and contributing to our economy and our society. The great thing is that we have some really good solutions in the start to the work. We just need the resources and to follow our Black, Indigenous, and people of color's lead. We heard earlier from Apano and Naya about the impactful work that they're doing, and also how empowerment economics model has been is a model to be able to do that. Additionally, I did want to call out the African American Financial Capability Initiative, which was here locally run by 4 Black-led organizations, SEI, Urban League, PCRI, and PALF, to develop goals and strategies based on input from community about what kind of help they actually needed to achieve economic prosperity. Given that, MP, we're committed to continuing this work, for creating a space to have this conversation, for continuing to center BIPOC and building equity-centered community design principles in our programmatic and our policy work. We want to be able to work on creating a shared narrative. Lots of people talked about today, language is important. It's important how we talk about these things and how we move away from the individual to the systematic solutions that are needed to effectively talk about economic justice. And lastly, we're working on creating a structure for state policy and advocacy agenda around economic justice. We invite you to join us and to continue the conversation. Today was just one part of bringing folks together, and we are working toward our annual re-conference in November to have a larger convening of our housing and economic justice advocates to continue this conversation. We look forward to having you all join us in person, hopefully, to continue that conversation. Some of this work is already happening, so I'd encourage folks to reach out if you're interested in being connected. I just want to call out a couple quick things. The work of Stop the Debt Trap Alliance, a coalition formed by Hacienda to address challenges of debt and lack of consumer protection in BIPOC communities. There's the Oregon Poverty Roundtable, state government looking at how to address poverty. We need a lot more community input in that conversation about how they should be responding, and so much more. There's work around racial disparities in home ownership. There's work to expand the EITC expansion of EITC. So please do reach out please do reach out if you're looking to be connected with any of those programs. Everyone will receive an email from us tomorrow morning with the information about today's presentation, as well as a survey. So please let us know your thoughts, ideas, and if you're interested in continuing the conversation. Again, I want to thank our speakers, those who attended. I hope you all are able to join the conversation with us later this summer and fall. I look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Thank you very much.